gone over some of the basics of Japanese ghost stories, I'd like to talk about one of the most popular and one of the most commonly remade Japanese horror stories, Yotsuya Kaidan, which has also been called Tokaido Yotsuya Kaidan. And this story was originally a kabuki play from 1825. This is probably the most famous Japanese ghost story, and it has been adapted into films about 20 or 30 times. So there are many, many different versions of the story to watch if you are so inclined. My two favorite renditions, however, are the 1959 version by Nakagawa Nobuo, of course, and the 1966 version, which stars Nakadai Tatsuya as the main character. I'm sure everyone recognizes Nakadai Tatsuya. He starred in Harakiri, Sword of Doom, Kagemusha, Ran, High and Low, Kaidan. He is just as big a star of Japanese cinema as Toshiro Mifune is, even though his name is not quite as well known in the West. Yotsuya Kaidan has a pretty basic story that we might all recognize. Iemon is pretty much a bastard. He is a masterless samurai who is in love, kind of, with a beautiful young woman named Iwa, or O-Iwa, depending on what version you're watching. However, O-Iwa's father doesn't really want her to marry Iemon because he thinks Iemon is a scoundrel. So, Iemon kills her father and then vows to find vengeance on her father's killer, who of course is him, but she doesn't know that. And in exchange, O-Iwa marries him. However, about a year later, after she's given birth to their son and they're married, Iemon is kind of bored of the whole thing and has found a younger, more wealthy woman who is interested in marrying him. Her name is O-Ume. So what O-Ume's family does to convince Iemon to leave his wife is they give him this very horrible poison that will disfigure his wife and make her very, very ugly. And of course he gives this to O-Iwa and also tells his servant to seduce her. However, the servant fails at this and feels so bad for her that he confesses everything. O-Iwa then dies, however she vows revenge on Iemon and the family that he was going to marry into, and comes back as a vengeful ghost. There are a few other plot points that I'm kind of skipping over, but I think you should just watch the story if you want to find those out. For the most part, I just wanted to let you all know that it has all of those basic elements of Japanese horror stories that we know and love. The vengeful female ghost, complete with long black hair that may or may not drown people, has a common theme of water in it, and it also has troubled relationships between husband and wife, which is very common in Japanese horror stories as well. Personally, I think that Nakagawa Nobuo's 1959 version of the story is superior to the 1966 Illusion of Blood version, just because the compositions and the directing really have preserved the feeling of a kabuki play. He sets the camera back pretty far, so the sets almost resemble the sets of a kabuki play. He pans the camera across the screen. It actually flows really, really well, and it probably reminds a lot of people of the way Akira Kurosawa set up his shots in movies like Kagemusha and Ran, again setting things back and letting the viewer view everything that's going on within the set. I think it's effective, and I personally like it. However, I really also encourage you to watch the 1966 version because Nakadai Tatsuya's performance is really good in this, and his performance really, I guess, in every film is good. But he really is very, very well cast. A, to play a bastard, he does that really, really well. He's a really mean guy. But two, he's got like the biggest eyes I've ever seen. Like they're huge. And it really helps him look very haunted and terrified by this ghost who's terrorizing him. So I think his performance is really spectacular, and it deserves to be watched. Another problem with the 1966 version is that it is highly reminiscent of the 1964 film Kaidan by Kobayashi Masaki, and that film actually received a lot of attention at the Cannes Film Festival in 1964. It was released 2 years after this film, so there is a possibility that it was influenced by Kobayashi's work. In particular, the director's use of reflections is really strikingly similar to the use of reflections in Kaidan. However, the storyline, though it is similar, probably had nothing to do with the storyline of the Black Hair episode of Kaidan, because the story was based off a kabuki play which had been around for over 100 years. But I think Yotsuya Kaidan is a very important ghost story because it establishes several of the most recognizable components of Japanese horror. Vengeful female ghosts with the scary long black hair, dead children, conflicts within families, drownings, water, etc. In particular, in the 1966 version, Illusion of Blood, there is an exchange between Iemon and his friend Naosuke, who's just as much of a bastard as Iemon is, that I really feel is very important when it comes to Japanese horror. Naosuke has just learned about how Oiwa dies, and he says, wow, she must be really bitter in the next world to have been killed that way. And Iemon kind of shrugs it off and says, even if she is, what can a woman do? And I think this exchange really sums up a very important part of Japanese horror. Even though women are often depicted as weak and disadvantaged in life, in death they often become much more powerful and have the ability to avenge the injustices that were done to them while they were alive. You see this a lot in modern J-horror. The socially weak or repressed female gaining the ability to either pursue the life that she's always wanted to pursue, or to avenge the wrongdoings that were done to her when she was alive. But Yotsuya Kaidan also highlights a very important difference between older Japanese horror cinema and more modern J-horror. Horror movies of the past followed a certain intrinsic logic, a cause and effect sort of logic. Do something bad, and bad things will happen to you. Iemon's fate is no better example of that. He did some really shitty things to his wife, and now he's gonna, pay for that. However, in modern J-horror, ghosts, they really freely attack anybody, and often really for no real reason. Like in The Grudge, you make a poor real estate decision, and BAM! You're haunted. Some people like to kind of connect this to the effect of the Amshin Rikyo sarin gas attack that happened in Tokyo in 1955. I don't really know if it's a result of that event. It might just be a more general symptom of living in modern society. You kind of are forced to realize that bad things happen all the time, often to good people, and there really is no rhyme or reason to why things happen. Moreover, there's nothing really you can do to prevent it. So, on that happy note, I'm going to end this episode, and next I'm going to be talking about the Godzilla of Japanese horror movies, The Ring.